We've decided to dive back in with a couple of videos. We focused in part one on what's happening with the Canucks immediately. Part two, because of some things we missed at the trade deadline. Obviously, they added Lindholm early. There was talk of that being flipped. Anticipation over a number of players. Nothing really happened right at the deadline. Canucks had made their moves. We see Pettersson signed, Hughes is signed long-term, Miller, Besser, Demko. When you look at these other key pieces, Patrick, where is this franchise in terms of its construction? What do you, I mean, they may well win the Stanley Cup this year, and then it's like, how do we hang on to all our guys, yada, yada, yada. But assuming that this is a step, certainly getting back to the playoffs, what is immediately facing this team in terms of its construction once we get to the offseason?
Well, the defense, right? I mean, this is a team that has nine. We got nine free agents, 7 of whom are unrestricted. But on the defense, 4 of those unrestricteds are on defense. So you got Tyler Myers, you got Nikita Zadorov, Ian Cole, Mark Friedman, and then you have Filip Hronek, who is a restricted free agent and has arbitration rights. So you have to determine how you're going to basically juggle that money around. Obviously, they would really like to keep Hronek. I think they would really like to keep Zadorov. They probably, I think, with Zadorov, can if they do decide to keep him, and I think they will. Although there isn't a ton of they didn't have to pay a huge price to get him. So I mean, you should, the sunk cost fallacy is that they have to do it once you pay for him. But the truth is, Zadorov, there is no sunk cost. They gave him a 5th round pick. So, like the thing with him is, they are already talking to Myers. We understand Myers loves it here, right? Like, think back to that story I wrote last year about the desires of players to live here and how much they want to be here, and this was a guy that came here as under sort of certain circumstances to be a top player, top defenseman for them. It set up to be something he never was. When he had been most successful in Winnipeg, he had not been a top pairing defenseman. He had been a guy that was kind of your number 4 or 5 guy, had some offensive upside, came in and was asked to be more than he was meant, designed to be, and had some struggles. But the last couple seasons, especially under Rick Tocchet, has I think redeveloped his game. He's a much steadier player. The system helps him a lot. Like, he talked to me about that earlier this season, that he just knows this is, there is no thinking. They just look. You the puck comes to you. You're in this position. There's a forechecker coming on you from this angle, so you look here. And when things have been going well, that's been the truth. And I apply the old Kevin Biek, or the old, I used to say, what the hell is Sopel analogy. People say, oh, what the hell is Sopel doing, right? Well, I first realized when Kevin Bieksa arrived that you never went, what the hell is Bieksa doing? There were moments when things went wrong and he tried to handle the puck or he turned the puck over. But in the end, overall was a steady player who had moved the puck up the ice, that things happen. And in the last year or so, I would say that is the territory that Myers has moved into. They haven't asked him to be this big star player, but they've asked him to be a steady, calm influence, a little bit defensive minded, and the system works for him. And so, if he's going to stay, obviously he cannot be back on $6 million. You're going to end up using, so that money gets redeployed. Does it get redeployed to Hronek? Like, there's just no way Hronek is going to make more than Quinn Hughes. You can just know that on the face of it. So any talk that he's going to make $8 million, at least in Vancouver, is never going to happen. Now, if they go to just in the back of mind, all this, if they go to arbitration, he's got an incredible case. He's playing a ton. He's putting up tons of points. Points matter big time in these kind of filings. There's all kinds of things that his camp are going to be able to point to and say, I am worth a lot of money. So it's going to be a challenging negotiation. But, if you say you cut Myers down to $2.5 million, $3 million, right? You could take a bunch of that money and put it immediately on Hronek. But then you're sitting there going, okay, how do we deal with Zadorov? Zadorov wants a raise, right? Zadorov's at $3.75 million right now.
That's the problem with a team that's successful.
Right? Like, exactly. It is the problem team successful. So, you know,
Like
are you?
from an NHL point of view, Hronek can easily make a case to make more than Hughes. But
Yeah,
within your team structure, how do you
yeah,
justify that? Yeah.
exactly. So how do you make that work? Then you turn around and, you know, Ian Cole, I think for the most part had a pretty good season. I think he's struggled a bit lately. Um, if you bring him back, you're certainly not bringing back on $3 million, and I'm not sure he's 35, 36. You know, is time catching up to him? Um, you know, and the cap's going up, so it's not like you can't retain Myers, Hronek, and Zadorov. You've got Susie under contract, so you know that's 5 guys right there. You start looking. You like Noel Juleson. Juleson's been doing well. You got a couple guys in Abbotsford that you're intrigued by. Like, you know, I mean, we haven't seen anything of him, but Patrick Elvine keeps talking about Philip Johansson. You know, maybe I don't think there's anything there, but he seems to hope maybe there is. You talk about Elias Pettersson, DPD as people like to call him. You know, the Canucks are very high on him. A year or two. Guillaume Brisebois is obviously still under contract, finally back in Abbotsford. There is some hope for Jet Wu. I'm still not convinced, but you know there are a few options to start filling out the bottom end of your roster, and that is something the Canucks themselves know. You know, once they've committed, say they do decide to stick with Zadorov and Hronek, right? They have all three. You know, you're positioning yourself in a spot where you start needing to think about, okay, who can we have at the bottom end of our roster for cheap, right? And then you look up front, and you know, like Elias Lindholm, it's hard to see how they keep him. Obviously, they paid a lot to get him, but the Canucks have been pretty open. They're willing to accept that this is a rental if need be. They
And
like what he has.
So much
But
of this will hinge on what happens in the playoffs, right?
sure,
Like,
yeah, and I think you know that's it. Teddy Bluger has been a really great story. Probably you can get him back for the contract he's currently making, but then the question becomes Dakota Joshua, right? Sorry, actually that's 10 free agents. I mentioned 9, it's 10. You know, Dakota Joshua is going to get a big raise. What are you paying him? What's the term? He is a guy that of all the players, you know, there's Hronek obviously is in a great position. Zadorov's in a pretty decent position, but Dakota Joshua is in a better position than Zadorov. He's had an incredible season. And he's a guy, he's an unrestricted free agent. Like he's a player that could go to market and find out what he's worth, and he's probably going to get paid well. So like the Canucks have some dilemmas to make. I think I just don't see how you don't bring back Joshua, but you know, that's a reality you're facing. You know, Vasily Podkolzin's an RFA, you're probably just going to try to qualify him, right? Like the challenges in front of you they're not complicated because the cap's going up, but there are some decisions to be made.
Podkolzin's an interesting one because he's been, you know, he's had his seasoning, right? And we know what in the same draft, we know what Höglander's become in terms of his importance to this team. But the two real prospects left, Lekkerimäki and Wilander, do you expect either of them to get? I mean, again, we're doing this from 10,000 feet before we even got through the playoffs. But do you expect either of them to be ready to at least get an honest shot in training camp next year?
No, I think the plan for both of them is a year away.
Okay.
Certainly they'll be here. The plan is that, I mean, Elias Pettersson is supposed to ride. I mean, I have to double check, but is, you know, basically the Swedish Hockey League regular season is coming to an end, and they're setting up for the playoffs. So Elias Pettersson's season, like his team has not had a very good year. So he will be able to come over, and he's supposed to be joining Abbotsford soon. He'll help Abbotsford out as they're trying to fight for the playoffs. Lekkerimäki could as well come over, but it's kind of in how Raybro's season going. They're having a decent season, so they could have a bit of a playoff run, or it could be over very soon. So both of them will be here. I think at the end of the season here, you know, to at least get some experience with seeing what it's like in Abbotsford. I mean, maybe they'll be Black Ace type guys. You bring them into the playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, just to see what that's like, just to get a taste of the atmosphere. But there'll be a training camp next year, and I don't expect either one will truly battle for a spot. But you know, you never say never. Sometimes kids are ready sooner than you realize, and both of them are on ELCs. Both of them have sort of advantages in that space. That's that way for you building your roster. But no, I think they're still likely. I mean, maybe they'll play in the second half of the season, but I do not expect at this point that they would open the season with the Canucks.
We'll just finish up here with we saw contract extensions for several members of the Canucks front office. Again, when you look at all the key pieces of this organization as a whole, it looks like they're in a far more stable position than they've been in well over a decade. So I wanted to ask you that, like, if you were to give the front office a grade, when you look at how they've taken this team fairly quickly from, I'm not going to say it's easy to hit on your high draft picks. You need your Quinn Hughes and your Elias Petterssons to succeed. But I think the failure of the old regime was not having that back end of the roster be a liability. And, again, we've got a bit of an interesting front office here with Rutherford, who's got the experience and he's the president. Alvin doesn't like to be front and center, but he's by name general manager. So what kind of grade would you give this front office in terms of what they've done in a fairly short time in this new regime? Not really new anymore, but
I think they get an A. They've reinforced a team that had a lot of good things about it, in stars and Pettersson and Hughes and Miller and Besser and Demko and the underrated Connor Garland. Not always the most efficiently built. That the Benning regime brought in some good players, but at pretty great cost and some really poor bets along the way.
Not just keep it to a thank you, Jim. Patrick, we don't need to revisit that.
Yeah. But
you can give a dose of nitrous to the machinery, though.
Yes. But at the end of the day, they've added to this roster, right? Like they have brought in defensemen like Hronek as an example, Zadorov, Carson Soucy, who I think we've talked about as being such an important sort of keystone player for their overall approach, like just the way he settles them defensively. They've done a really nice job. Like, just Casey DeSmith, probably the best backup goalie we've seen. I mean, since Corey Schneider, anyway. People obviously loved Eddie Lack, but like in terms of sort of consistent every night, and maybe Eddie Lack is the last really high quality backup goalie they've had.
Well,
but
the ability to.
But it's been a decade.
Yeah.
But it's been a decade is the point. And Demko was Jacob Markstrom backup, but he wasn't. He was. It took him a while to get settled. He wasn't a guy you're like, oh my goodness. So, right now, Casey DeSmith is the guy, and the Canucks, I think, are right to be comfortable as the guy that's pinch hitting. They've done really well. And obviously, the draft it's a question mark, if only because we have to see how the players play, right?
Yeah.
It's not a question mark because they've made bad bets or anything. There's no sort of Olli Juolevi kind of question mark here. There's no Jake Virtanen. There's no why did you pass on Nylander or Ehlers or Tkachuk or Sergachev or the list of players that they have.
Or why did you give Louis Eriksson a top of market deal?
Why did you sign Louis Eriksson? The deadline, like Patrick Alvin was clear. I think there were some deals that he probably could have made, but they would have been at great cost, and he wasn't prepared to do that.
I just have to say, I saw some feedback on social media that day, and I'll date myself because I remember working in the newsroom pre-internet on trade deadline day, and the phones are ringing off the hook. Did the Canucks make any trades? Did the Canucks make any trades? Like it was like a Christmas day. Like, what did we get? Even though the Canucks made no moves, I saw a lot of feedback from Canuck fans saying, I'd forgotten how much fun this is.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten how much the conversation of, could we get this guy? Could we get that guy? Oh, don't give up this guy. What did Edmonton like? You can't discount how much fun the season has been for the fans, and I think that's a big part of it. Am I boring you, Patrick?
No.
The question was too long.
I don't even know what happened. All right.
I think we will wrap it up there.
No, but you're right. No, but you're totally right, because the point is in the end that they were in the middles of stuff, and my impression certainly is, they kicked tires on some big names. They realized. I mean, I think back to that conversation I had with Jim Rutherford. I think it was on the Wednesday before the deadline, and just some of the clues he was trying to leave there, which was that we might not do anything big. I'm still a bit surprised they didn't go for Toffoli in the end, but Alvin was clear. He said, "Listen, I have 3 years now to think about," or he jokingly said 8, but if you really think about it, it's 3 years because that's how long Quinn Hughes' contract lasts for. They have 3 years certainly to now contemplate as their window. It's not just all or nothing right now, and that that is the thing that, and I wrote about this, that Pettersson created a scenario where they, by re-signing, that they didn't have to get stressed anymore, and they didn't have to do things that probably weren't going to pan out. Like, that is the thing about all this, right? You do all these moves and you probably aren't going to win. Like, you're almost certainly not going to win. So what's the cost? And
well, they'd given up a first for Lindholm.
So
they'd given up first for Lindholm. So I think, well, whether it was Gensel or whoever, do you want to give up another one? And then if things don't work out, now all of a sudden you're in this hole again, which I think Jim Benning got into, like mortgaging the future for trying to win in the present. And then, so I think it's good, not to be so conservative that you're constantly holding on to your picks. Hell, you gave up a first rounder in the Hronek deal, and you did with Lindholm. So I think you have to give them credit here for not being all in one way or the other. Like, you're not like hanging on to every draft pick, hoping that a 7th rounder is going to change your fortune, and you're not throwing everything away. So if it burns, you're left with nothing. So I think you have to admire the approach.
Well, and how rarely they've drafted in the 2nd round, right? Like, that's the thing that shouldn't be forgotten. That
that's
right
where
now,
you find I know BX was a 3rd rounder, but you're right. That's where you find a lot of those extra
But
pieces.
And more and more, the 2nd round, like the way the draft shifted. I'm going to write a story about this because there's enough, you can see enough there that the way teams have gotten better overall at drafting has really changed, and the values of 1st and 2nd rounders are worth so much more than 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. But yeah, you can just look at the current roster and guys
absolutely
directly drafted from the 2nd round, like Höglander's one, Demko's another. The last guy they drafted in the 2nd round was Denita Klimovich, who is, I think, a pretty long shot to make it at this point. But that's and Logan Stan. I mean, Logan. The top thing on Klimovich, by the way, just I know that's not a big point, but the top thing on Klimovich is that he will forever not be Logan Stankoven, right? Like, I think at the time, people liked Klimovich's potential. There was a reason that he was being looked at, but in that spot, there was just no argument. You talk to anybody outside of the Canucks staff to not draft. Now, obviously, Stankoven went another 4 or 5 picks after the Canucks did. But for what the Canucks needed, that was the kind of player that they should be drafting right there. Klimovich should have gone later. Maybe he wouldn't have been later, and then, move on. Get the guy that should be there. So, yeah, if they had made, just as a counterexample, if they had gone for that Toffoli trade, they're trading next year's 2nd rounder. Right. And then all of a sudden you don't have, you're drafting, you've already traded your first. Your first rounder is a late first. So it's not a top end, but you're still, it's a player that would play for your team. Right. You don't have a 2nd rounder this year. So you're already, accepting that you are not going to have that. The next Niels Höglander is not going to be in your roster for another 3 years. Right. Yeah. Like, it took him 2 years to get here. It probably takes 2 years for a player of that quality to get here. Lekkerimäki will be here next year, which is good. But there's only you have a handful of guys. That's why in the end, that's why I think that, like I said, to go back to the original question, that's part of why they get the A, was that they were wise and smart on this one, and they know that that is something if they need to, that's a chip they could play later on.
Great stuff, Patrick. We know we got to get you off to practice. I want to thank all our viewers for having patience with us, not being around. As I say, we will not miss another week before the end of the season. Sign up for the Canuck Report newsletter. You get everything delivered to your inbox. Visit theprovince.com, vancouversun.com to get all of our sports coverage, which is focusing even more heavily on the Canucks. Got some fun things planned for the playoffs that we've been hanging on to for a few years here, obviously. Thanks, everyone. We will talk to you next week.